Yeah.
This week, the Riverfront Times in St. Louis, which is like it's a major alternative newspaper. I have read that thing for a long time. They had an article that the next statue that should be torn down is St. Louis, Louis IX, that sits atop Art Hill in front of the Art Museum. This is called the Apotheosis, and they were advocating it's now time to tear that down if we're tearing down Christopher Columbus. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I put up what I thought in like a blurb on Twitter, and I got no response. But like, I think it's a disgrace. I mean, it's if we start tearing down figures that we look to as hero, might be a strong word, but if we start tearing down figures for their smallest imperfections, then we're taking down the potential of like what we have to become. We're stripping down all of these figures that we should be striving towards to a way, but striving towards like maybe with a better perception. But if we're tearing them down because of their smallest imperfections, it's leaving no room for, I don't know.
Mistakes. It's making it an honor culture.
No room. Yeah, exactly. No room for mistakes. It's like you can't, and it's, I don't know. I hate to like point at like superhero genre or whatever, but they say that like the Marvel movies do so good. The reason that people love them, and it's a Peterson concept also, is like that the greatest men and women are always dangerous people. The greatest people in history are dangerous individuals. And the reason that we love Marvel movies, and there's this new uptick in the superhero genre as a society, is because those heroes, these people that we strive towards, are painted with their struggles as part of the plot. Like that's a significant factor in how their hero's journey is curtailed, like in each subsequent like entry into that world that they've created over there. And at what point do we start artificiating even fictional characters? Like fictional characters can't have a flaw, because if we're like putting this fictional character with a flaw up on a pedestal, it's like, you can, and again, like I'm sounding like total nerd, but like Tony Stark, alcoholism, or you point at this guy, it's like whatever, XYZ, you can start fishing these out. But that's why people are drawn to these characters, because we're able to see the flaws that we have in them. And I'm not like condoning anything that like any, like historical figure has done that might have been like against what we would refer to now as like not, coherent with like what should be proper behavior in like a productive society. But still, like we cannot start selectively tearing down, I think, within reason. Like I guess some
well, I don't understand if what we're doing is we're saying, hey, this history that we have, or these individuals that have been placed in a large venerable position, what we need to do is to destroy the monuments. They need to be torn down, not with any sort of process, and then defaced, and then they're gone, obliterated. It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, even the Romans, when they would have different factions come in and they would tear down the statues of their enemies, what they would actually do is take them down and put them in a memory palace. So you could go to a place where you would see the ancient people that they revered, and then the victors could say, well, they appeared to be a good person, but actually they had these other challenges, and you could retell the history. But you weren't destroying everything, because you need that physical memory. You want those things. If we start tearing down every single monument, or think about all the terrible places that we've kept up as monuments, things like Auschwitz or different concentration camps, in order to be able to say we should never forget that this was real.
Yeah. Well, is that a Kate, I guess, to name drop, like Kate Crosby, was that what she was talking about with memory palaces? Maybe
it is. Yep. That's Kate Crosby.
I should have looked into that more, because I didn't realize that was what that was. I never like looked into that terminology, like using the memory palaces term, but, I mean, that's a great idea.
And it's like super important, because like, okay, most people as they're sitting here listening to us talk, and they say, oh, we're talking about a statue of St. Louis. So maybe they picture a guy standing, or maybe they picture a guy on a horse. But if you go look at this statue, the Apotheosis, it is a truly magnificent sculpture. I've watched children walk up to that thing. I've taken my own nephews. You can go stand by it. As they walk up the hill and they can see this giant monument, they all of a sudden, like, their eyes get big and they start like wondering, who was this character? And in that article by the Riverfront Times, they claimed that he was hoisting up his sword to plunge it into the Muslims against the Crusades. But if you go actually look at that statue, you'll notice he's holding that sword by the fucking blade.
Yeah.
He's holding the blade in his hand. He's not actually trying to attack anyone. It's, in my interpretation of the Apotheosis statue, is that he is holding it by the blade and holding the hilt, the part where you hold it, out to other people. He's saying, look, I took this as far as I could. It's your responsibility to take it further. And if people actually understood Louis IX, they would understand he was one of the first people to bring back innocent until proven guilty, and that you didn't want to have people fight battles in order that they can decide who was guilty and who wasn't. And he used to go and visit the poor that would come to his palace and bring 200 of them in a night to feed them. So, like, if we're going to look at this character and say he is so terrible that we need to tear it down, well, then I want to see the person that is so clean, that their history is so good and so perfect that they should be able to tear this down and not have their own monument torn down. Then that would be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, that's, I mean, like, to your credit, I've learned like most of what I admire about like that as like the public figure of our city, like from you, because you like go and you talk around the world and you talk up like King Louis IX. But yeah, and here we are in like our own city having calls to action in local papers to tear it down like that. I thought that was absolutely ridiculous to even like suggest.
And people in St. Louis, like, I think people are trying to listen. I think they're trying to be polite. I think they're trying to understand where other people are coming from. But at the same time, if you're going to give that level of understanding, then you should also understand the history and what this all means. I mean, the real person that I would love to see a statue of, maybe down by the river, that's just as large as that, is St. Louis's mother. Because that woman, if you go look into her history, I am not strong enough to do what she did. She was like 35 years old. She'd had 12 children, or 13. They don't actually know. 6 of them died. And by the time her husband became king, and he died 3 years later, the oldest son she had was a 12-year-old boy who now became king of France. And they're in the middle of multiple border wars. There's barons that say they're not going to take him in. And she literally walks to each of the barons with her family in tow and says, we want you to name him king, and we're going to help you figure out what are the problems that you have right now that we can solve. So she solved 2 border wars, a prisoner dispute, and one of the guys threatened to have her killed so that he could become king. And they called out to all the townspeople, and from the Baron's castle to Paris, there was a line of villagers that came out to protect her and the boy, because she was so respected for who she was, how she treated people, and the children she was raising. So when I sit here and read an article by some author in the Riverfront Times that says we want to tear that down, let's entertain that. But I want to know who is the person that we should hold as the apotheosis, the highest part of society that we should aspire to, because we all need people to aspire to.
Well, and where do you draw the line? Because I love, and I guess that's where I was going to go like a couple minutes ago, is like sometimes that there is a place, like you don't want to have statues of Hitler up. You don't want to have statues of maybe Confederate leaders that did X to X amount of people, like whatever the numbers are. But like, where does that line get drawn? But to tear those things down and stomp on them, like, I guess I get it from like a place of like, you know, hate that's built up from X amount of years. But I love hearing that concept. Like that was the first time like it I guess resonated with me, the memory or whatever the terminology.
The memory palace, yeah.
Yeah, the memory palace of like putting them somewhere, but not in the public's eye. It's like, this is history that we have. We're going to put it here and we're going to explain it with context, but we're not going to tear it down and pretend that it did not exist. That is unacceptable.
I was in East Berlin a couple of years ago, and I was actually listening to the book on tape, The Gulag Archipelago, which is the most stomach-turning book I've ever read. And it describes how people got swept up into bringing the communist revolution into Russia, and then it came for them. So the power position that the guy had, he thought, hey, I'm sitting pretty, I'm following all the rules, I'm doing everything the mob wants me to do. And then he got put in jail. And he talks through the whole time about how he imagined that eventually they would come to their senses and realize he was one of the good guys, but they never did. And so he ends up working in this set of gulags, work camps that were just awful. So I'm listening to this book, and you know that the gulags are all a result of the writings of Karl Marx. And I'm walking in East Berlin, and I run into a huge statue of Karl Marx. And I think, that's weird. And I take a photo of it. And then I'm walking maybe another half a mile or so, and I run into another statue, and then another one. If you go in East Berlin, they're everywhere, these statues of Karl Marx. And there are some people that believe that he killed millions and millions of people based on his writings. We have statues up of him, or at least they do in Berlin. Who decides which of these people are monsters, and which time frame from history should we understand, and under what context should we say? I mean, I would never dare to go tell the East Berlin people, tear down these statues. Like, it's part of their culture. It's who they are. What do I know about what they need to remember?
Yeah, I don't know what the right answer to that is. It was my partner's dad gave me a book about a guy who travels to Italy, and he basically just spends, I think it's called A Summer in Italy. It's like kind of like a light read, but he's talking about how he's in some of these smaller towns, and basically exactly what you're describing with Karl Marx. Like, there's still like a weird idealization behind Stalin in Italy, in some of these smaller areas of where like people thought he was a hero of the people, blah, 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 whatever. Gets described in that book. And he definitely depicts it in a negative light, but he kind of like elaborates, like, as he's kind of thinking in that writing of like, okay, like, here's maybe the thought process of these people in these smaller areas, and like what they might have seen as the benefit of that person. Like, it is a cultural thing, and like as a society we should not, leave them up and idealize them like with that positive light. But I think like there's, I don't know, it's a weird line, and I definitely don't know the right answer, but I know for what it's worth, for like my individual like knowledge, or I guess an opinion at that point, is like it's not history that should be maybe taken down from like the public eye, but it shouldn't be like shunned or pretended it didn't happen.
Well, we don't make better decisions as an angry mob, right? Like, we don't make decisions where we're like, hey, let's really think about how this is going to impact things in a year or 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. When we're like, we don't have time to think, we have to act right now. Never in those situations do you make good decisions. And I think it seems like people are saying there's a virtue to acting now. Now, you could also look at the other side and say, justice delayed is justice denied. And I mean, I believe that, right? If there are people sitting in prison cells for things that they didn't do, or for crimes that we should not have them locked up for, yeah, let's get that problem solved, right? Are you sitting in a jail cell waiting for a trial? Let's go. Come on, get everybody in line. But we don't do it in terms of, we've got to make the decision right now, because the right now decision making is always the worst, right? That's why we have reason and rationality, is to avoid the emotions of the mob.